It is indeed a little early to be predicting the 2026 general election here in New Zealand, but someone else on the internet decided to give it a crack, so let's have a listen and see if we agree or disagree, as well as what should happen. What is the best possible outcome for New Zealand next year at the general election?
It is a little early to give an election prediction. We still have over a year until the next election, but I want to speak about the future of New Zealand politics. I want to speak about what I fear will happen. The political right has done a bad job in government. They have failed to fix the economy. Masses of businesses are shutting down, unemployment rates are high, people are still fleeing to Australia. The government is seemingly at war with itself, with a constant power struggle between the coalition partners. Worst of all, Luxon is an incompetent and unlikable leader. He is a bad communicator, he is out of touch, he is weak. David Seymour and Winston Peters run circles around him. The government has struggled badly in the polls. They never got the usual honeymoon period. The left has closed the gap quickly. In some polls, the left is ahead of them. I think a left-wing victory is highly likely in 2026. Not because the left is good, but simply because the coalition is so chaotic and incompetent. Many voters will run back to Labour. Not so long ago, I watched Chris Hipkins give his speech on the state of the nation. It appears Labour is still stuck in the past. They lack bold policies, they promise to competently manage the status quo. This approach is outdated. This approach dominated the 1990s and the 2000s. Helen Clark, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, these leaders embodied it. But that era is over. People want change. They do not want competent management of a failing status quo. Voters have repeatedly indicated a desire for change. If Labour fails to provide that, we will have a very serious problem. I predict that the left will win in 2026, deliver mediocre and moderate governance for 3 years, and then they will get beaten by a more extreme right-wing coalition in 2029. That is what happened in US politics. Trump was thrown out, replaced by the moderate mediocrity of Biden, and then an even more extreme Trump was re-elected. Spineless centrism will not hold off the populist right. The left must embrace bold populism. Populist sentiments are prevalent. If the left fails to satiate them, the far right will. Look at the USA and Europe. Learn from their mistakes. The left needs to get its act together. We cannot allow them to deliver uninspiring governance only for the far right to win power in 2029. If the left governs from 2026 to 2029, they will set the scene for a very far-right government. Imagine it. 3 years of uninspiring and unimpressive Labour Party government. Constant stupidity from the Maori Party. Serious issues remaining ignored and unaddressed. Can you imagine a better political environment for the far right to rise? And Winston will probably be gone by then, meaning his voters will move on to someone far worse. We need a bold populist left to cater to these populist concerns, or else they will benefit the authoritarian right as they have everywhere else. That is my advice. In all likelihood, they will ignore it. In the long term, they will pay a very high price for that, as will the bulk of the population. Competent management of a broken status quo is not good enough. We need bold reform. We need fundamental change.
I can't lie, Paul's getting me excited there. The idea of this far right in 2029 is very, very appealing to me. And that's because I understand far right just means a reasonably conservative, traditional party with common sense, who puts the interests of the nation first, things like that, things that are, for the most part, normal up until 5 minutes ago. So that's quite exciting. I like the sound of that, and that would be the best silver lining of a loss next year. However, I think he's delusional if he thinks that there's going to be a left-wing government after next year. What's going to happen, and I'll tell you this right now, what's going to happen is we will have a right-wing government, but in this case, it's going to be far more to the right than it is right now. Because NZ First and ACT are going to have a far larger proportion of the coalition's vote than it did last time around. You see, the biggest issue in the last election was not that the coalition won, it was the fact that National had so much power within the coalition. It was that National received 38% of the vote. Now, if we look at the latest Roy Morgan poll, National has really fallen off. They've dropped down to around 33%, relative to their 38% at the election, whereas NZ First, who only got 6% of the election, are up on 9%. This is the type of improvement and gradual improvement that we saw from the likes of Reform, and I feel like as we move into campaign mode, which New Zealand First is already readying for, this is going to continue inching higher and higher and higher. They just need to be careful with how they do it. Now, one thing that is going to be a little bit contentious there is the fact that they oppose the Treaty Principles Bill means they might have some trouble winning some of the votes that will end up going to ACT. But ultimately, I'm of the belief that in this MMP system, we're going to have a two-party coalition at least anyway, and what better than an ACT NZ First coalition government than some stupid National ACT coalition or ACT NZ First or National NZ First coalition, which quite frankly is not going to do it. National are the issue here. ACT have their downsides, and you can say the same for NZ First to some degree, but National are the primary issue. Now, you can call populism a problem. You can say that populism on the left is what's needed to combat this, but at the end of the day, the left can't possibly be populist because even the most radical views being purported by the left are no longer felt or believed in by this minority of people who feel like they're not being listened to by the establishment at large. You look at the LGBTQ communities, you look at people's views with respect to Palestine, this and that, and the general anti-capitalist, anti-neoliberal communities and groups within our societies. Once upon a time, you could argue that they were this minority that no one listened to, that were generally disregarded and ignored by academia, by the systems, by the establishment. But now they run academia, they run the systems, they run the establishment. They are no longer this target of populism. They are the base of the left-wing parties. They are the base of the Green Party. They are the base of even now the Labour Party, who have become increasingly more left-wing, increasingly more extreme. They are the base of Te Pāti Māori. These cultural Marxist beliefs have entrenched themselves within left-wing progressivism, so much so that even the most moderate of the left overlook it or don't even realise how much the people that they are voting for have been captured and warped by these extremist ideologies. Where the current opposition stands, which you would say is probably about 45%, maybe 48% on a good week, where the current coalition stands is including the populist vote on the left. Populism is going to increase their vote. Only a move away from that's actually going to increase their vote higher than it already is. The only way Labour and the Green Party and Te Pāti Māori can win next year is if they dramatically shift away from this left-wing populism, so to speak, and propose a more centrist, moderate view for the future. Which, by the way, does absolutely nothing because at the end of the day, no one wants that anymore. But generally, no one who actually sees a good future for this country believes that some moderate approach is going to do the trick, right? It is a more extreme approach relative to the status quo. But we know that the extreme approach on the left-hand side of things only leads to pain and suffering. The more extreme approach on the right-hand side of things just takes us back a few decades to when things actually function properly. It takes us away from this progressive nonsense in academia that believes that men can be women, takes us away from this idea that we are some colonial, white, patriarchal society designed to oppress minorities. Takes us back to our roots, to our understanding in a traditional society, placing more value on community involvement. The most radical element of all of this is that we start putting our own interests first as a nation. That is the radical nature of the right now. Putting New Zealand first is radical. Because that's not what the left agrees with. They believe that societies that put their own interests first are inherently oppressive. That societies which have a set idea on what their culture should be and what they should value is oppressive. So long as it comes from a perspective which can be related to or directly imported from a colonial, patriarchal, oppressive society or system. It's abundantly clear in the West that the shift to the right is not only a preference for many, it is a necessity for the survival of our world. You look at the UK, they are shifting dramatically to the right compared to recent years. Reform are the running favourites to win the next general election there. Likewise in Germany, AfD made huge gains in their previous election, even though the AfD were kept out of any meaningful position within their parliament or within their government because the right, or like I like to call them, the faux right, decided that partnering up with the left was the best possible way forward for their country. In other ways, they want to maintain the status quo, maintain, quite frankly, the globalist agenda. You look at Canada, they had a shift to the right, even though they still lost relatively convincingly. Canada started on a positive trajectory, and whether that continues remains to be seen. Australia acknowledged that the Liberals are not right. The Liberals may as well be Labour, and so the Liberals got absolutely decimated last week. So that again is more or less the shift to the right. Pauline Hanson's One Nation did very well. There is hope for Australia yet, but for the time being, they're going to be suffering under the regime of a Labour government. But also what's fortunate is at least the people of Australia decided that they were done with the communist nonsense of the Greens over there. That's also a positive sign. They also saw through the bullshit of the Teals, which is also a positive sign. Generally speaking, the trend is to the right across the Western world. You know, they can sit down, commentators of various kinds, including Paul here, they can sit down and they can criticize the right for their stances on immigration and so on, but these are issues which matter to people. People believe that culture is important. Frankly, if you're a Māori, and you're one of the likes that think that Te Pāti Māori is onto something, you should oppose mass immigration too, because that devalues your standing in the society as well. There is merit to cultural distinction and prioritizing the culture of a nation to ensure that it runs smoothly. A nation that has whole communities which are basically completely foreign to the natural order of things in that nation, that is not a society you should want to live in. That is a society that is only going to lead to division, to a breakdown, to differing standards, and we cannot have that. When you import the third world, you become the third world. That is just a reality. And stating that, whilst being populist, is only populist because the establishment refuses to accept it. The establishment refuses to have an honest conversation about how unchecked immigration which is just unreasonable and simply isn't providing any value for money, is negatively impacting our society. This, along with many other reasons, is why in 2026, we're not only going to have the same three parties retain power, we're going to see the more right wing of those parties gain more power. And the left is going to be spending at least the next 6 years, let's say 7 years, because we've still got a year out for the next election, wondering where they went wrong. I'll tell you where they went wrong. They became progressives who absolutely love authoritarianism. That's where they went wrong. And until they realize that, until they say, you know what, maybe Marxism isn't the way to go, maybe then they might just get their nose back in the door.